The shrill screams of a newborn baby pierced the frigid Montana winter air as Grace Porter clutched her third daughter to her chest, tears streaming down her face not from joy, but from terror. Her husband Jedediah stood in the doorway, his silhouette dark against the swirling snow outside, his face contorted with rage as he realized what she had delivered. Another girl. Another disappointment. "Not again," he growled, advancing toward the bed where Grace lay exhausted from the difficult birth. "3 times you've failed me, woman. 3 times?" It was 1875 in Broken Creek, Montana territory. The harsh landscape demanded sons who could work the land, build, hunt, and carry on a man's legacy. Daughters were seen as burdens by men like Jedediah Porter, expenses that would only result in dowries rather than helping hands. Grace instinctively curled her body around her newborn daughter. "Please, Jed, she's perfect. Please don't." His hand struck her face before she could finish. The baby wailed louder, and upstairs, Grace could hear her 2 older daughters, Mary, age 4, and Elizabeth, age 2, begin to cry at the commotion. "Your one job was to give me sons," Jedediah spat. "One simple job." Grace's body shook with sobs as she tried to shield the infant. "I'm sorry. Next time, there won't be a next time." Jedediah grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. "I'm going to town. When I come back, I expect you to have thought about how you're going to make this right." The door slammed behind him, leaving Grace alone with her 3 daughters and the midwife, Mrs. Sullivan, who had witnessed everything with a grim expression. "He'll calm down," the older woman said without conviction, helping Grace position the baby to nurse. "Men are always disappointed at first when they want a boy. He'll come around." But Grace knew better. This wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last. The beatings had started after Elizabeth was born a girl when Jedediah had been certain the second child would be a son. Now, with a 3rd daughter, Grace feared what would happen when he returned from drowning his anger in whiskey. "I need to leave," Grace whispered, the realization dawning on her like the weak winter sun through the curtains. "He'll kill me this time." Mrs. Sullivan's weathered face softened. "Where would you go, child? With 3 little ones and in your condition?" Before Grace could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her blood run cold. It was too soon for Jedediah to return. The midwife peeked out the window. "It's just that cowboy from the Wright ranch," she said. "Probably lost his way in the storm." The knock at the door was firm but not threatening. Mrs. Sullivan opened it to reveal a tall man with snow dusting his shoulders and hat. He removed the hat respectfully, revealing sandy brown hair and kind eyes. "Madam," he said, nodding to Mrs. Sullivan. "Name's Kieran Irving. I was heading back to the Wright ranch when the storm picked up, saw the smoke from your chimney, was hoping I might warm up before continuing on." Mrs. Sullivan glanced back at Grace, who had pulled a blanket over herself and the nursing baby. "Well, Mr. Porter ain't home, but I suppose it would be Christian charity to let you warm yourself. Come in." Kieran stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. His eyes fell on Grace and the tiny bundle in her arms, and a genuine smile crossed his face. "Congratulations, madam," he said softly. "Boy or girl?" "Girl," Grace answered, her voice barely audible. Something in her tone made Kieran look more closely at her face. The red mark where Jedediah had struck her was beginning to bruise. His smile faded and a muscle twitched in his jaw. "She's beautiful," he said, though he couldn't see the baby from where he stood. "All babies are blessings." Mrs. Sullivan put coffee on to boil. "Mr. Irving works for the Wright spread. They're good folks, decent employers from what I hear." Kieran nodded, warming his hands by the fire. "Yes, madam, Mr. Wright's fair, pays on time and doesn't drink away the profits." He glanced at Grace again. "Got 3 daughters of his own, too, dotes on them something fierce." Grace looked up, something like hope flickering in her eyes before dying away. What did it matter if other men valued daughters? Her husband didn't, and she was trapped. The wails of the 2 older girls upstairs grew louder. Mrs. Sullivan sighed. "I'll check on them. They're probably scared from all the commotion." When the midwife disappeared upstairs, Kieran moved closer to Grace, speaking in a low, urgent voice. "Madam, Forgive my forwardness, but are you in danger here? Grace stared at him, this stranger who had seen through her situation in moments. Tears filled her eyes again. He'll kill me this time, she whispered. 3 daughters, no sons, he said I've failed him for the last time. Kieran's face hardened. He glanced toward the window where the snow was falling heavier. Where did he go? To town, to drink? How long ago? Not 20 minutes. Kieran seemed to make a decision. Madam, I don't mean to frighten you, but I've seen men like your husband before. My own mother suffered similarly. He hesitated. If you want to leave, I can help you. Grace clutched her baby tighter. Leave? How? Where would we go? The Wright ranch, Mrs. Wright would take you in, at least until you can make other arrangements. She's a kind woman. Mrs. Sullivan returned with 2 small girls clinging to her skirts. Mary, the oldest, stared at Kieran with wide, fearful eyes. Elizabeth hid her face. Girls, Grace said softly, this is Mr. Irving. He's a friend. Kieran knelt down to their level. Hello there, those are mighty pretty dolls you have. Mary clutched a worn rag doll to her chest. Papa says dolls are silly. Kieran's smile didn't waver, though his eyes darkened. Well, I think they're just fine for pretty young ladies like yourselves. Mrs. Sullivan looked between them, understanding dawning on her face. You're thinking of taking them away, aren't you? Kieran stood. Only if Mrs. Porter wishes it. He'll come after them, Mrs. Sullivan warned. He's a mean drunk, and he's got friends in town. The Wright ranch is 30 miles from here, Kieran said. And Mr. Wright doesn't take kindly to men who beat women and children. Grace looked down at her newborn daughter, then at her 2 trembling older girls. The decision crystallized in her heart. We need to leave before he returns, she said firmly. Mrs. Sullivan, will you help us? The midwife nodded, already moving to gather clothes and necessities. I'll say you went to your sister's in Helena if he asks. I don't have a sister, Grace said. He doesn't know that, Mrs. Sullivan replied with a grim smile. Within half an hour they had packed what little they could carry. Kieran brought his horse around to the front of the house, along with the Porter family's own mare that had been in the small barn. Mrs. Sullivan helped Grace dress warmly, the newborn baby whom Grace had decided to name Sarah bundled securely against her chest. The storm's getting worse, Kieran said as he helped Mary and Elizabeth onto his horse. But it'll cover our tracks. Mrs. Porter, can you ride? Grace nodded. Yes, but not well with the baby. I'll lead your horse, we'll go slow and steady. Mrs. Sullivan pressed a small bag of food into Kieran's hands. God go with you, she said. I'll try to delay him if he returns before the storm covers your trail. Grace hugged the older woman. Thank you. For everything. As they set off into the swirling snow, Grace felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. She had never defied her husband before, never even considered leaving, despite the worsening abuse. Now she was fleeing with 3 children and a stranger, a kind-eyed cowboy who had appeared like an answer to prayers she hadn't dared to utter. The journey was slow and treacherous. The cold bit through their clothes, and the children whimpered from time to time. Kieran kept them moving, sometimes dismounting to lead both horses through deeper drifts, telling stories to distract the girls from their fear and discomfort. My pa used to say that snowflakes are angel kisses, he told Mary and Elizabeth as they huddled together on his horse. Each one different, special in its own way, just like people, like girls? Mary asked timidly. Especially girls, Kieran affirmed. Strong, smart girls who are going to grow up to do amazing things. Grace watched him with her daughters, this man who spoke to them with respect and kindness. It was so foreign to what they had known with their father that the girls seemed almost confused by it. Night had fallen by the time they reached the Wright ranch. Lights glowed in the windows of the main house, and as they approached, a dog began to bark. The front door opened and a man with a lantern stepped out. Who goes there? He called. It's Irving, Mr. Wright, Kieran called back. I've brought guests seeking shelter. Thomas Wright came down the steps holding his lantern high. His face registered surprise when he saw Grace and the children. Good Lord, man, what's this about? Kieran dismounted and helped the girls down. This is Mrs. Porter and her daughters. They need sanctuary, sir. Mr. Wright took in Grace's bruised face and the tiny bundle against her chest. His expression softened immediately. "Martha," he called over his shoulder. "Come quick, we have visitors who need warming up." A plump, kind-faced woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She took one look at the bedraggled group and sprang into action. "Bring them in this instant. Those poor babies must be half frozen." Within minutes, they were inside the warm kitchen. Mrs. Wright bustled about, bringing blankets, hot tea, and soup. The Wright daughters aged 16, 14, and 10 crowded around curiously, immediately taking to little Mary and Elizabeth, who were shy but clearly intrigued by these friendly older girls. When the children were settled by the fire with bowls of soup, Mr. Wright drew Kieran aside. Grace could see them talking in low voices, Mr. Wright's expression growing darker as Kieran explained the situation. Finally, he nodded firmly and returned to Grace. "Mrs. Porter," he said gently, "Kieran has told me about your circumstances. I want you to know that you and your daughters are welcome here for as long as you need. No one will harm you under my roof." Fresh tears sprang to Grace's eyes. "I can't possibly repay such kindness." "Nonsense," Mrs. Wright said, sitting beside her. "Any decent human would do the same. Now, let me see that beautiful baby." As Mrs. Wright cooed over baby Sarah, Mr. Wright continued, "We have a small cabin on the property used to be for the foreman before we built him a new place closer to the bunkhouse. It's simple but sound. You and your girls can make it your own." "I can work," Grace said quickly. "I can cook, clean, so there will be time to discuss all that," Mrs. Wright interrupted kindly. "For now, you need rest and recovery. You've just given birth, for heaven's sake." That night, Grace and her daughters slept in a proper bedroom with a door that locked, a precaution suggested by Kieran, though the Wrights assured her that Jedediah Porter would never find them there, much less be allowed on the property. As she lay in bed with Sarah sleeping beside her and her two older daughters curled up together nearby, Grace allowed herself to believe, for the first time, that they might be safe. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and healing. The small cabin was indeed simple but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms, a main room with a fireplace, and a small kitchen. The Wright family provided furniture, linens, and necessities to make it comfortable. Grace insisted on working as soon as she was physically able. She took on mending clothes for the ranch hands, helping Mrs. Wright with preserving food, and eventually cooking some meals for the bunkhouse. Her daughters thrived in their new environment. Mary and Elizabeth followed the Wright girls around like ducklings, absorbing their confidence and joy. Baby Sarah grew strong and healthy, and then there was Kieran. He visited the cabin often, always bringing small gifts, a wooden toy he had carved for the girls, wildflowers for Grace, a rocking chair he had repaired for nursing Sarah. His kindness was consistent and without expectation. "Why are you so good to us?" Grace asked him one evening as they sat on the small porch of the cabin, watching Mary and Elizabeth play with the Wright family's dog. Kieran was silent for a moment. "My father was like your husband," he finally said. "Mean-spirited, especially when he drank. Believed sons were valuable and daughters were burdens. My mother had 4 daughters before me, her only son. Did he hurt her? Your mother," Kieran nodded, his jaw tight, "and my sisters, not me though, the precious son." His voice held a hint of bitterness. "When I was 16, he beat my mother so badly she lost the baby she was carrying. Another girl, the doctor said. She died a week later from her injuries." "Oh, Kieran," Grace breathed, her heart aching for him. "My sisters were split up among relatives. I ran away, couldn't bear to live with what he'd done. Worked ranches across 3 territories before landing here 5 years ago." He looked at her directly. "When I saw you that day with that mark on your face and fear in your eyes, I saw my mother. I couldn't leave you there." Grace reached out hesitantly and touched his hand. "You saved us. You saved yourself, Grace. You made the choice to leave. That took courage." Their eyes held for a long moment before Kieran cleared his throat and stood up. "I should get back to the bunkhouse, early start tomorrow." As spring turned to summer, Grace began to worry about her future. The Wrights had been incredibly generous, but she couldn't depend on their charity forever. She needed to make a more permanent plan for herself and her daughters. One afternoon, as she hung laundry to dry behind the cabin, Kieran approached on horseback. He dismounted and helped her with the heavy, wet sheets. "I've been thinking," he said as they worked. "I've saved almost everything I've earned these past 5 years, Mr. Wright is selling a small parcel of land 50 acres with a creek running through it. Good water, decent soil." Grace glanced at him, puzzled by this sudden topic. "Are you thinking of buying it?" "I am, building a place of my own." He hesitated. "I was wondering if you and the girls might want to be part of that plan." Grace's hands stilled on the laundry. "What are you saying, Kieran?" He took a deep breath. "I'm saying I care for you, Grace, for your daughters too. I've watched you these past months, your strength, your kindness, your love for those girls. I'm asking if you might consider a future together. As husband and wife," Grace whispered, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "Yes. Though I'd understand if you never want to marry again after what you've been through." Grace studied his face, the honest eyes, the gentle mouth that spoke such kind words to her daughters. In the months since their escape from Jedediah, Kieran had shown himself to be everything her husband was not: patient, gentle, hardworking, and respectful. "The girls need a father," she said slowly. "A real father who values them." "They have that in me already," Kieran said. "I already consider them as my own. Mary, Elizabeth, and little Sarah, they're precious to me." "And me?" Grace asked, her voice barely audible. Kieran stepped closer. "You, Grace Porter, are the bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. I think I started falling in love with you that very first day when you decided to save yourself and your daughters." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready." "We can wait," he said immediately. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands whether it's next month or next year." Before she could respond, they heard a commotion from the direction of the main house. Shouts and the sound of horses approaching fast. Kieran's expression changed instantly. "Get inside," he said urgently. "Take the girls and lock the door." "What is it?" Grace asked, fear clutching at her heart. "Riders coming. Could be nothing, but—" He didn't finish the thought. "Go now. I'll come for you when it's safe." Grace gathered her daughters inside the cabin, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see Kieran striding toward the main house where Mr. Wright and several ranch hands had gathered. Facing a group of approaching riders, with growing horror she recognized the lead rider. Jedediah, he had found them. Grace pulled her daughters away from the window. "Girls, we need to be very quiet, like a game." Mary looked at her with 2 wise eyes for a child of 5. "Is it Papa? Has he come to hurt us again?" "No one will hurt you," Grace promised, though fear made her voice shake. "Mr. Irving and Mr. Wright won't let that happen." Outside, she could hear raised voices. Jedediah's angry demands carrying on the summer breeze. "She's my wife. Those are my daughters. You have no right to keep them from me." Mr. Wright's reply was too low to hear, but Jedediah's response was a roar of rage. Grace peeked through the curtain to see Jedediah dismounting, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. The ranch hands stepped forward, but it was Kieran who confronted him directly. "The law may say they're yours, Porter," Kieran said, his voice carrying clearly now, "but the law also says you can't beat your wife for giving birth to daughters instead of sons." "You stole them from me," Jedediah snarled. "You turned my wife against me." "Your wife left because she feared for her life and the lives of her children," Kieran replied evenly. "Now turn around and leave before this gets ugly." Jedediah drew his gun, but Kieran was faster. In a swift motion, he disarmed Jedediah and knocked him to the ground. The other riders, friends of Jedediah from town, reached for their weapons, but found themselves facing the armed ranch hands of the Wright spread. "This isn't over," Jedediah spat as Kieran held him down. "She's my wife by law." "Then we'll change that," Mr. Wright said, stepping forward. "I've already sent for the sheriff and a judge. We have witnesses to your abuse, Porter. Mrs. Sullivan has signed a statement about what she saw the day your 3rd daughter was born." Jedediah struggled against Kieran's hold. "You can't prove anything?" We don't have to prove much, mister. Wright continued calmly. Just enough to convince a judge that Mrs. Porter has grounds for divorce. Montana territory may be new to the Union, but we have laws protecting women from brutes like you. The confrontation ended with the arrival of the sheriff, who had indeed been summoned by Mr. Wright days earlier, when a ranch hand reported seeing strangers asking questions about a woman with 3 young daughters in nearby towns. Jedediah was taken into custody not for the abuse, which was difficult to prove legally, but for attempting to draw his weapon on Kieran. His friends were escorted off the property with a warning not to return. That evening, as the excitement died down, Kieran came to check on Grace and the girls. "Are you all right?" he asked, his face etched with concern. Grace nodded, though she was still shaking. "Is it true what Mr. Wright said?" "About a divorce?" "Yes, he's been planning for this possibility since you arrived. The judge will be here next week. Mrs. Sullivan has already provided her statement and Mr. Wright has considerable influence in these parts." "And after that," Grace asked, "will Jedediah leave us alone?" Kieran sat beside her at the small table. The girls were asleep in the bedroom, exhausted from the frightening day. "Mr. Wright believes the judge will grant the divorce and possibly even a restraining order of sorts. Jedediah won't be allowed near you or the children." He hesitated. "But to be safe, I think we should consider moving farther away once everything is settled legally." Grace repeated. Kieran took her hand gently. "My offer stands, Grace. More than ever now, I want to protect you and the girls, give you the life you deserve." Grace looked down at their joined hands. "I was so afraid today, not just of Jedediah, but of losing what we've built here, what you've helped us build." She met his eyes. "I don't need more time, Kieran. My answer is yes." The judge arrived the following week as promised. The legal proceedings were straightforward, thanks to Mrs. Sullivan's testimony and Mr. Wright's influence. Jedediah, still in custody for the gun incident, was represented by a lawyer who could do little to counter the evidence of abuse. The divorce was granted, along with full custody of the children to Grace. Jedediah was ordered to stay at least 50 miles from Grace and the children, an unusual ruling that spoke to the judge's personal disgust with the case. "You're free," Kieran told Grace when it was over. "Truly free." 2 months later, on a crisp autumn day with the mountains blazing with golden aspen trees, Grace Porter became Grace Irving in a small ceremony at the Wright Ranch. Mary and Elizabeth scattered wildflower petals while baby Sarah, now almost 9 months old, was held by Mrs. Wright, who had become like a mother to Grace. After the ceremony, Kieran led Grace to a wagon packed with their belongings. "Ready to see our new home?" he asked, his eyes bright with excitement. The 50 acres Kieran had purchased from Mr. Wright was a beautiful piece of land with rolling hills, a clear creek, and a view of the mountains. In the center stood a small but well-built cabin larger than the one they had been staying in, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious main room, and a kitchen with real glass windows that let in the autumn light. "It's perfect," Grace breathed as Kieran carried her over the threshold, the girls running ahead to explore. "It's just the beginning," Kieran promised. "We'll add on as the family grows. Maybe a bigger kitchen for you, a proper study, more bedrooms for the children, more children." Grace asked with a small smile. Kieran's face grew serious. "Only if you want that, Grace. I'm already the luckiest man alive with you and our 3 beautiful daughters, our daughters." The words warmed Grace's heart. From the first day, Kieran had treated Mary, Elizabeth, and Sarah as his own, never once suggesting they were any less because they weren't his blood. "I think I might like more children someday," Grace admitted. "With you," Kieran kissed her softly. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Sons, daughters, it doesn't matter. Each child is a blessing." Over the next year, the Irving family put down roots on their land. They planted crops, built a small barn, and acquired a few animals, chickens, a milk cow, and horses for each of them as the girls grew old enough to ride. Grace found joy in simple things she had never been allowed to appreciate before watching her daughters play freely without fear. seeing Kieran teach them to ride and fish, sitting on the porch in the evening with her husband's arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset. On their first anniversary, as they sat on that same porch, Kieran presented Grace with a small wooden box. Inside was a silver locket. "Open it," he urged. Inside were tiny portraits, one of Mary, Elizabeth, and Sarah together, and one of Kieran and Grace on their wedding day. "It's beautiful," Grace said, tears in her eyes as Kieran fastened it around her neck. "I have something to tell you," she said, covering his hand with hers. "Something wonderful." Kieran's eyes widened. "Are you?" Grace nodded, smiling through happy tears. "Due in the spring, the doctor says." Kieran whooped with joy, lifting her from her chair and spinning her around. "Another blessing, boy or girl, it doesn't matter." "It doesn't," Grace agreed as he set her down gently. "Though I admit, I wonder what you do with a son after 3 daughters," Kieran laughed. "Exactly the same as I do with our girls. Love them, teach them, show them how to be good people." He placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "Though I'll confess, I'm rather partial to daughters. They take after their mother, after all, the strongest, most beautiful woman in Montana territory." As if on cue, their daughters came running around the corner of the house, faces flushed with play and laughter. Kieran scooped up Sarah, now a toddler with her mother's eyes, while Mary and Elizabeth clamored for attention, showing off a frog they had caught by the creek. Watching them, her daughters and the man who had saved them all, Grace felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. From the darkest moment of her life had come this beautiful future, built on love, respect, and the courage to begin again. In the spring, Grace gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Kieran doted on them both equally, just as he had promised. When neighbors or townsfolk commented on how lucky he was to finally have a son, Kieran would correct them gently but firmly. "I've been blessed 5 times over," he would say. "With a beautiful wife and 5 wonderful children, each one perfect exactly as they are." And as the years passed and their family grew, the Irving homestead became known throughout the territory as a place of warmth and welcome. The daughters, who had once been considered burdens, grew into strong, confident women who carried their father's lessons of equality and respect into their own families. Grace often thought about that snowy day when a kind-eyed cowboy had appeared at her door like an angel of mercy. How close she had come to accepting a life of fear and abuse. How one act of courage and one man's compassion had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran asked her one evening as they sat on their expanded porch, watching their growing brood of children play in the summer twilight. Grace leaned against his shoulder, the silver locket still hanging around her neck after all these years. "About how you called them your own from the very beginning, how you loved our daughters when their own father couldn't." Kieran's arm tightened around her. "They were easy to love. Just like their mother." Grace turned her face up to his, seeing the same kindness in his eyes that had given her hope on that desperate winter day so many years ago. "I love you, Kieran Irving." "And I love you, Grace Irving," he replied, kissing her softly as their children's laughter filled the Montana evening air. "Always and forever."